Good morning and welcome everyone on this very chilly morning to the launch of Culture and Commerce, Fueling Creative Renewal, the report of the Culture and Commerce Taskforce. Thank you all for joining us again and for your support and your engagement and all those wonderful ideas which have helped the task force in its work. We're delighted that almost 700 people have registered to join today's session, spanning the cultural, commercial and civic sectors. You can continue to share your ideas and views throughout this event on social media using the hashtag Culture and Commerce. This session is going to be recorded and available after the event. The link to the report will be shared with you in the chat, and you can also post questions in the Q&A for later in the session. The report we lay before you today is a blueprint for London's recovery from the cultural catastrophe which has been caused by the COVID pandemic. London has been hit hard, and our cultural and creative sector, one of our crucial attributes which makes London special and for which we are known the world over, has been hit especially hard. Venues are closed, unemployment in the sector is rising, and as a result, the city's attractiveness as a global business hub is at risk. London's world-leading creative sector helps secure its position as one of the best international cities in which to live, work, visit, and invest. If we lose this, then the ramifications will go far beyond this sector and be felt for years to come. No less than London's global competitive advantage is at stake. This is what lay behind the setting up of this Culture and Commerce Taskforce, a group of 19 senior leaders who have come together from across London's cultural and commercial sectors to address London's recovery. I would like to thank each and every one of you on the task force for your ideas, your guidance, and your contributions. Culture and commerce not only support each other, they need each other. This is why culture is a central part of my theme as Lord Mayor. I want London to remain a global cultural hub as much as a global financial hub. It is not just that culture attracts people to London, although it does in huge numbers. It also equips people with the skills needed for employment and innovation, attracts the best talent to live and work here, and builds the connections required internationally for London to remain a global hub. The creative sector will play a critical role in London's recovery, and this report sets out recommendations and actions for how culture and commerce can work together to enable this. Before I go into the report's recommendations, I would like to hand over to Jemima Frankel, Director of 64 Million Artists, who's going to give us all a creative boost, which has been part of all our task force meetings. So a quick creative exercise to get us energized, and I will encourage all of you to get involved. Over to you, Jemima.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Great to be here. I'm Jemima Frankel from 64 Million Artists. At 64 Million Artists, we believe that everybody is creative, and that when we are creative, we are able to make positive change in our lives and in the world around us. We aim to be a catalyst for the creativity of everybody in the UK, and we work with schools, libraries, universities, hospitals, and workplaces across the UK to make change happen. We celebrate creativity in its many forms, from cooking to dancing to making to exploring, and we're especially interested in the relationship between creativity and community and recognise the power of both in the workplace. So I'm especially excited to be with you all here today. Thank you very much for having me. So without further ado, time to get a bit creative and start off our day with the right foot. So I encourage you all to take a bit of paper and a pen. Hopefully you've got a notebook near you. And as the Lord Mayor says, it's a chilly morning. I'm looking outside my window right now and I can see some snow softly falling down. So if you're lucky to have snow with you, that's the weather outside. And my invitation to you is to think about what is your internal weather? What is your internal weather forecast today? So you might be feeling sunny and clear blue skies with rainbows inside of you today, or you might be feeling stormy, you might be feeling rainy, you might anticipate a storm coming later. I will inviting you to spend literally just 60 seconds with your paper and pen and put your internal weather forecast down on some paper. So you might like to do that in a doodle. You might get poetic and think about a few words that demonstrate how you're feeling, what your internal weather forecast is like, or you might simply like to just draw what you can see outside of the window. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to hand it over and we're going to play some music for 60 seconds. And let's give it a go. Let's see what comes out when we put pen to paper and think about our internal weather forecast. As I say, you can use whatever kind of form you'd like to do this. You can doodle, you can use words. You might even like to gather some things around you that are symbolic of the way you're feeling. Okay, 10 more seconds to finish off your internal weather forecast. Hopefully it's not as snowy as it looks outside of my window. Okay, and finishing up, put your pens down. So I'll very briefly share mine. I've drawn here a rainbow with clouds surrounded by snow, which I think is a nice oxymoron of an image, which is maybe apt to describe the kind of altering world that we've lived in over the last year. And I'm hoping for more rainbows as the day goes on and slightly less chilly snow. What about you, Lord Mayor?
Not being a natural artist, but I've got the sun and I'm on top of a mountain and I've put the words on top of the world.
Oh, fantastic.
On top of the world, but a little cold.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Well, my invitation is to keep that on your desk and think about how you'd like your personal weather to change throughout the day and what other things you can be doing to change that.
Jemima, thank you.
Thank you so much.
No, that's been brilliant, and you've just set us up for a great event. So really appreciate that, and we're all now ready to go. Hang on a sec, I just got to. So that was great, and I'm now delighted to share with you the headlines from our report and our blueprint for how culture and commerce can collaborate to accelerate London's recovery. The task force looked at 5 priority areas. The first one, growing a sustainable creative sector that addresses its long-term structural issues. The second area, securing the spaces needed to reanimate London and attract people to live, work, and visit. And the third, strengthening professional skills and nurturing the talent needed for innovation. The fourth, accelerating the digital transformation to maximize engagement and growth. And the fifth and final one, building the international connections needed to remain a competitive place to do business. The task force concluded that it is critical for culture and commerce to work together in new ways to build a renewed creative sector that accelerates economic growth and strengthens London. They identified 3 key recommendations where culture and commerce must work together to aid London's recovery. Creative activation, creative exchange, and creative enterprise hubs. Now let's start with the first, creative activation, bringing London back to life through creativity. Culture and commerce must work together to use creativity to bring people back into London as soon as social distancing restrictions allow. Whether this means repurposing public and commercial spaces for cultural displays, or using artists as part of urban renewal programs, or filling streets, shop windows, and office lobbies in the capital with creative activity to attract visitors, shoppers, and workers. Culture can bring our city back to life. The second, creative exchange, sharing knowledge and skills between culture and commerce. This is our opportunity to bring together London's creative and business strengths to boost professional skills, attract and nurture global talent, and build international connections. By drawing on each other's expertise, culture and commerce can access the creative and business skills needed to navigate the challenges of a post-pandemic, post-Brexit world. We propose establishing a London Creative Skills event for school leavers post-COVID, setting up a skills sharing program which offers professional development opportunities across the creative and commercial sectors, and founding an international exchange program which reimagines trade visits and connects the creative and commercial sectors across the world. After all, global connections are crucial to London's cultural and commercial success. And third, creative enterprise hubs, creating dedicated spaces for cross-sector innovation. Physical hubs can be a hotbed of ideas for innovation, and they can provide isolated workers with human connections and inspiration. Given that the use of space is being reconsidered as a result of the pandemic, we recommend a brokerage model that enables owners, occupiers, and employers to make office and retail space available for creative uses. We also propose a dedicated forum to give freelancers a voice in planning the future of the creative sector. Creative activation, creative exchange, and creative enterprise hubs. If we embrace these solutions, we can accelerate London's recovery from the pandemic and ensure that London's culture and commerce can support and sustain each other for years to come. The task force has identified 10 specific projects to bring these recommendations to life. I'll not list them all now, but you can find them on page 8 of our report. I encourage you to consider, as you read the report and listen to the discussion this morning, what role you can play in London's recovery. Is there a project here that you can help deliver? It is critical for us all to play our part. We are seeking partners to implement these recommendations. So please do reach out to us to help them a reality. Our project team will be in touch after the event. Now, we are very fortunate to be joined by Caroline Dinenage, MP, Minister of State for Digital and Culture, to discuss the government's support for the cultural and creative sectors and their contribution to the recovery. Thank you, Caroline, for speaking to us today. Minister, I'm pleased now to hand over to you.
Well, thank you very much. And it's a great privilege to be here today and to help launch this important report, Culture and Commerce, Fueling Creative Renewal. I would like to start by paying my special thanks to the Lord Mayor of the City of London and for the invitation, but also for this really important piece of work, and all the members of the task force for dedicating their time and their expertise to bringing this together. You know, prior to the pandemic in 2019, the cultural sector contributed £34.6 billion in gross value added to the UK economy. Isn't that incredible? In fact, the GVA of the cultural sector has increased by 9.5% since 2018 and 27% in real terms since 2010. So as you can see, this is and was a growing sector, employing vast numbers of people and proving itself as a real economic powerhouse on the global stage. And there is absolutely nowhere that this is more evident than in London. However, as your report highlights, it's London that's been hit so hard by the pandemic, particularly the creative sector. In fact, research published by the Mayor of London last week outlines how more than 26,000 jobs in arts and culture in the capital are at risk. And we know all too well the challenges that businesses and freelancers right across the sector are facing. And that's why, as a government, we took steps to provide support through the Culture Recovery Fund and wider government schemes. Of course, other sectors across DCMS, my department, but also across the wider economy, have also faced unimaginable disruption and loss, and we shouldn't lose sight of that as we think about how the culture sector will recover. But the unprecedented £1.57 billion Cultural Recovery Fund is the biggest ever one-off cash injection into the UK arts and culture sector, and it's being distributed across the cultural ecosystem right now. I'm so proud of our ability to be able to do this. It's there for hundreds of thousands of people who are the lifeblood of our sector to start working again when it's safe and it's permitted to do so. As I say, money is already flowing into the sector. The fund has already allocated over £1 billion in support, and to date, London has received over £300 million from the Culture Recovery Fund, with support being provided to a wide range of institutions, from Wigmore Hall to the Young Vic to the Brunel Museum and the Jewish Museum. The final £400 million of grants and repayable finance funding, which launched in December, will support those cultural organisations that are facing financial distress as the result of closures, and it will help them transition back to fuller opening, which we really hope will be later in the year. This investment is, of course, in addition to the wider package of government support that the sector's benefited from, things like the Job Retention Scheme, the Self-Employed Income Support Scheme, various government-backed loans, VAT deferrals and business rates relief, to name just a few. In addition to that, we have our Commissioner for Culture Recovery and Renewal, Neil Mendoza, who continues to work so hard to develop work on philanthropy for the cultural sector, which focuses on corporations, on trusts, on foundations and on individuals. And we work so closely together, and I'm really committed to listening to individuals and groups to discuss the impacts of COVID at the front line, at the coalface on the sector, and how they're adapting to the new normal we find ourselves in, and what more the government can do to support. These discussions have just highlighted the passion and the ingenuity there is within these sectors, and how we can all learn from one another as we battle this virus. That's why forums such as yours are so important to me. What better way to bring the commercial, the civic and the cultural sectors together to create a sustainable future for the entire cultural sector? Excuse me. Although the immediate and medium-term impact of COVID on the cultural sector has been the government's focus over the last 11 months, of course, a key priority has to also be to develop a recovery plan for the sector's long-term future once the pandemic has passed. And the report that you've produced takes this thinking a step further. It provides, excuse me, a vision for how we can start to work towards rebuilding the cultural sector through creative innovation and the combined efforts of the cultural and commerce sectors. Of course, as you well know, it will be absolutely vital for the cultural and commerce sectors to work together to respond and evolve over the coming months and years, and this will be essential for the country as a whole, as well as for London. The recommendations in the report highlight what action needs to be taken to support the recovery of the creative sector in London, whilst also enabling innovative collaborations to build it back better for the future. The priority areas that you've identified in the report for how culture and commerce can work together will be the building blocks of recovery in the capital. And I look forward to seeing how these great projects you've identified around creative action, around exchange and enterprise hubs will enable the cultural sector to grow. These really are some rays of hope for our sector. It will undoubtedly be transformed by the pandemic, But, you know, creative people are inherently entrepreneurial. And through the work you're doing, I hope we can ensure it's transformed for the better, working across society to ultimately thrive and remain one of the UK's greatest national and international assets. So thank you again for the vital work you've done over the last few months and for this great report, which comes at such an important moment for the arts. And I will very keenly follow the outcomes of your conversations, both today and in the future. I look forward very much to hearing more in the months ahead.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you very, very much. And it's wonderful to have your support, and we really appreciate that. And now I would like to introduce our panel discussion, which will be chaired by Charlene Prempeh of the Financial Times. Joining us today, we have Justine Simons, Deputy Mayor of London for Culture and the Creative Industries, Dame Vicky Hayward from Festival UK, Gideon Moore from Linklaters, and Tonya Nelson from Arts Council England, and Ross Morgan from Heart of London Business Alliance. I will now hand over to Charlene. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, for the introductions and for sharing the insights from the report today. I'm really pleased to discuss the subject of London's creative renewal with the panel. I spend a lot of time championing Black creatives and Black business, either through my creative agency, A Vibe Called Tech, or in the column I write for FT How to Spend It. And what's clear is that having a diverse creative industry means having a healthy ecosystem that includes culture and commerce. Obviously, this has come out of circumstances that we could not have foreseen, and definitely these are circumstances we didn't wish for, but it is exciting to explore the opportunities for culture and commerce to collaborate in new ways. And I'm hoping that this panel discussion will further highlight the need, as well as the routes, to all of us acting as partners to bring the report recommendations to life. And before we start, I just want to flag that Justine might need to leave a bit early as she has another commitment, but it's no reflection on how interesting she's finding this discussion or our questions. And also please place any questions that you have in the chat, and there'll be a Q&A at around 8:45. Okay, so let's get into it. My first question, the report calls for greater collaboration between the cultural and commercial sectors. Justine, starting with you, from your perspective, what are the opportunities that stronger collaboration between culture and commerce can achieve in order to accelerate recovery?
Thanks, Charlene. And thanks again to, before we get going, to the Lord Mayor and the City for your leadership on this. It's been really, really fantastic. So I think, you know, culture and commerce are absolutely interrelated. And I think as we move into kind of dedicated recovery programs, it's more important than ever. You know, culture is really the DNA of our city. It's kind of our identity, but it's also part of an ecosystem. It drives hospitality, it drives the nighttime economy, it drives the visitor economy. And also it attracts talent. You know, when we ask people why they come to London, on average, 4 out of 5 say it's culture. And that isn't just tourists, that's people who are making the decision to come and work in the capital or live in the capital. So it is, you know, it's really up there as a driver to attract talent into the city. If you look at the creative economy itself, in London, it's worth 58 billion a year pre-COVID. 1 in every 6 jobs was a creative one. And then, of course, there's the supply chain, which isn't really kind of thought about traditionally as the creative economy. But if we've got 58 billion pounds in the creative economy and then another 40 billion in the supply chain. So that's, you know, hairdressers and carpenters and all the services that go to kind of drive this important industry. So it's super important. I think thinking about the city particularly, there's also a really kind of brilliant relationship there in the form of the city's core, kind of the backbone of those city services, legal, IP, accountancy, all of those industries support the creative economy. You know, and what we're seeing, I think, is that, you know, parts of the creative economy are moving at different paces as we move through recovery. So whilst the live performance industry has been very hard hit and can't open right now, the filming industry, thanks to the brilliant work of our agency, Film London, have managed to get 85% of film production back up and running in the capital. So when COVID hit, £1 billion of filming was paused and kind of stopped immediately. So that industry is really getting kind of back on its feet now, and we expect, tens of thousands of jobs on the horizon there. So, I think there are really strong kind of, there's a really strong energy, there's really strong kind of recovery starting to happen. But it's not all one big kind of industry, things are happening at different times. But I think, what is really clear is that relationship between, the ecosystem, the culture and the commerce is super strong. And it's something that we must deepen to get the kind of most power out of the creative economy for our social and our economic recovery.
Thank you, Justine. And Ross, what's your take on it?
Apologies, I was in the middle of writing to Justine a question. I'm trying to listen and participate all at the same time, but I'll put the point across, Justine, verbally rather than in the chat. But I was really impressed by the government-backed insurance scheme that was offered to the film industry, and it certainly has saved that industry. And ourselves, along with peers and colleagues and stakeholders across London, have been lobbying for the same type of insurance scheme for all of the cultural and art sector. So I'm hoping that perhaps that's one thing that might be taken away from today, because it certainly is something that is desperately needed by that sector. In terms of the question itself, Heart of London Business Alliance, we're a business improvement district, and you've got plenty of those in the city also, and we're a vehicle for businesses to invest in their area. And in the Heart of London, our businesses, 600 of them from across various sectors, large and small, invested through the Heart of London Business Alliance in a new cultural strategy for the West End. And for me, that is the start of how culture and business can collaborate. And so we've managed to develop a really strong strategy that the entire area, whether it's culture or commerce, have been able to invest and come together in. The strategy that we've created, it's none of this is new. I think there's an awful lot of, we needed to dust it off from previous years, but certainly I think what the crisis has done is, like Justine just said, really shone a light back on the fact that the two, commerce and culture, are intrinsically linked, and currently they're all suffering from the same challenges or facing the same challenges, but also they have the potential to really come together and drive success and drive us out of this crisis and into recovery. But our strategy, very similar to the report that has come out, is it's all about promoting the area's unique history and its character through possibly new consumer channels. So rather than from the traditional channels, perhaps from the institutions, for example, Fortnum and Mason's and the Ritz, or even McDonald's has a role to play in really promoting art and culture, perhaps to a new set of audiences that may be overwhelmed by the idea of attending somewhere like the Royal Academy in all its grandeur and beauty. And it's also an opportunity to assist our businesses by providing a kind of a cultural infrastructure that allows them to come together and think and come up with ideas, and ultimately to create new consumer footfall for the whole area. And it also provides an opportunity for collective investments in cultural clusters, for specialized businesses and kind of cultural activity. And lastly, our aim was to enable art and cultural organizations to deliver beyond their kind of physical boundaries. I think art and culture began outside, like your kind of traditional market, and slowly but surely, probably because of our fabulous weather, kind of has reverted indoors. But unfortunately, what that does is possibly alienate a whole audience. And I think what our and your report suggests is that let's bring that out and let's break down some of those boundaries, and our strategy really focuses on that. But just to give you a couple of examples in terms of what's in our strategy and practical things that we've done, and how businesses can come together. Scenes in the Square is all about film and bringing bronze statues of scenes of films across a century out onto the streets and into flower beds and bursting out of walls and atop of buildings, so that everyone can enjoy and celebrate. Leicester Square, for example, is the home of film. We also have the augmented reality gallery, where businesses host plaques where people can scan using their phones or their iPads and see art that perhaps they wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to see. So again, a real collaboration between the art institutions and the business community. And last example would be our Piccadilly Art Line, which is all about that particular patch, really celebrating the Royal Academy and bringing it out into the streets. So whether that might be in the form of shop windows like Fortnum and Mason's, or whether that is painting the streets and putting banners up, there's a real opportunity, really practical examples of the types of things that a strategy and report such as this can lead to.
Thank you so much, Ros. And moving on from that, let's get into the actual kind of recommendations. So the report outlined 3 key recommendations to help build the creative sector and build back London's competitiveness. Recommendation 1 was focusing on enabling creative activation. So I want to know, and maybe starting here with Vicky, is how do you see culture and commerce working together to help re-energise London and accelerate economic recovery?
Well, thank you. And I mean, it's important to remember the Lord Mayor's words at the beginning, really, isn't it? Because we couldn't have imagined a time like this, and it's quite hard to imagine our way back into how things used to be. And I think it's going to be incredibly important to remember that the things that sustained us through this time and got us through this very difficult period was innovative thinking and teamwork. Because, he's right, we are in the middle of a catastrophe, and what we have before us is kind of an experiment that we never wished in a million years would have happened. But we can now see what it's like when we don't have a creative economy beating at the heart of the city of London, along with all the other important economies that function there. And we miss, don't we, so quickly, that collective experience, that community gathering. We now know what it looks like and what it really feels like. And I think it's incredibly important as things start to recover that we do remember this time, and we remember how dependent and codependent we all are on each other to really flourish. This report, I think, is an incredibly good idea, and congratulations to everyone and the Lord Mayor for his leadership. Because a call to action like this, which actually, let's be honest about it, needs to help lubricate the system with some cash, means that collectively, I think everyone will be a lot better off than they are fighting individually. And I do think that collectively, there's a lot more cash in the system than perhaps at the moment we really realize. And if you look to other examples, you can find that. If you look to the benefits of the cities of culture, if you look to the benefits of the festivals that have happened around the country, you can absolutely see how collective action starts to really unlock not just money, but also audiences. I think the brilliant thing about this initiative is it's standing on very firm ground. The human race seems to be hot-wired to want to be creative, and we're hot-wired to want to come together. So the minute that we can, we're going to definitely find that we've got a lot of customers. There's an enormous propensity to want to buy. If you look at where spaces and places have been animated in the past, you think about the Sky Mirror of Anish Kapoor, or you think of the Sultan's Elephant from Raw Deluxe, or you think of Ultimately Gormley's Skyline animations, or the poppies at the Tower, or the huge digital audiences of something like Jeremy Deller's animation of the Battle of the Somme. you can begin to see ways in which the city could animate itself and bring people very much back into it. As was said, the daytime economy and the nighttime economy, from the tailors and the dry cleaners and the coffee shops and everything else, is entirely dependent on it. There's going to be a time for reflection. There's going to be a time for memoriam. We need to be able to think about the people and the country and the way that it has suffered during this time. There's also, I think, going to be a sense of wanting to come together and actually in time to celebrate that fact. I can't tell you exactly how to do it. All I can tell you is that on Festival UK 2022, our call to action has now brought together 27 universities, 12 festivals, 13 TV and film companies, 9 coders, 7 digital tech specialists, 8 museums, 5 architects, and even a zoo. And the truth is that as you go on this journey, you will find more and more people that will want to take part. And you have the skills and the resources and the leadership to help London recover, which is such an important thing. So don't waste time overthinking it, as we often do, but get on with it, because it's a really important initiative.
So Vicky just mentioned this idea of the skills that we all have. And that brings us to kind of recommendation 2, which talked about sharing skills and knowledge between culture and commerce is critical for the recovery, and the report calls for culture and commerce exchange. How will these skills exchange help drive London's competitiveness? Gideon, can we start with you on that?
Yeah, sure. I sit here as somebody who signed a lease for a new HQ in London just before the first lockdown. And so I've got every incentive to ensure that the vibrant and exciting city that people are talking about is brought about, because we've seen that everyone in the offices can work remotely. The benefits that can accrue to individuals as a result of that, I think, can't be underestimated. But I think having worked remotely, I think sort of a lot of us really fully understand that actually the benefits of coming together, working in offices, bouncing ideas off colleagues are absolutely key to the continued success of our businesses. So in addition to making the office environment exciting, I think that it's really key for us each to ensure that the city as a whole, and London as a whole, is a really exciting and vibrant place for us all to want to be part of and to attend. So when I first started to consider what sort of skills that a place such as Linklaters may have and be able to bring to bear, obviously we're not actors, we're not artists, etc., in the true sense of the word. So I had to ask myself sort of what is it that we can bring to the party? And I think the answers are at many different levels. It's already been touched on, the fact that there is a need for space, both to show exhibits, but also for artists to be able to set up and conduct their skills. And again, I think that with remote working and the hybrid working that no doubt we will all be sort of participating in going forward, I think that will create opportunities. So we need to be able to make that available for those able to use it. The other thing is that we've got fantastic HR, business development, IT departments. And again, they have a skill set which I'm sure that many institutions would benefit from. And of course, we tend to, I think, always defer to and refer to the larger institutions, the big names in the city. Actually, there are a lot of freelancers around that actually have struggled measurably throughout this pandemic, and actually they don't necessarily have that infrastructure to be able to bring them together. So again, I do think that big business could play its part in creating networks that would allow those freelancers to perhaps become better aware of what opportunities may be out there for them.
Thank you, Gideon. That brings us nicely on to recommendation 3, where the report highlights how physical hubs are critical to enabling the cross-sector fertilization of ideas, as you've mentioned. How can culture and commerce come together in creative enterprise hubs and drive cross-sector innovation? And here, Tonya, I'd love it if you could lead us on this question.
Thank you. So I think having space for creative innovation is very, very important, because it's about having that space for day-to-day interaction that really fuels rapid iteration, prototyping, ideas really being brought to the fore and being tested on a continual basis. And so I think it's really important. With Arts Council England, one of the pillars of our new 10-year strategy is about this idea of dynamism, which is being able to rapidly respond to the challenges that are ahead. And our organization's doing a fabulous job now of trying to respond to COVID, and that's fantastic. But we want to take that further. And we know from the cultural sector in the past, maker spaces like Somerset House Studios or Battersea Art Center having a scratch lab theater for rapid innovation of theater pieces. And even now, National Gallery has National Gallery X, in which they have creatives and technologists working with them. Those are places where actually great innovation, new creative content has really come out of that. And what we want to do, but unfortunately with that though, those are limited spaces. Spaces are really hard to come by. They're limited spaces, and they have limitations on who can be involved. And so I think if we do have these creative enterprise zones, we have the opportunity to bring more people together for innovation from different parts of the sector. And I think, we sometimes do innovation around producing products, that type of thing. But I think innovation around business models will be really important in the future. It'll be really important to have different people from different parts of the sector being able to come together in these spaces. So yeah, I mean, me coming from I have a university background, and being in a university where I had the opportunity to run a museum, but also be able to work with the engineering department and other departments to innovate. It's kind of like we want to replicate that feeling of being in the university environment where R&D is something that's part of daily life. And I think the ideas in this report really do advance that.
Thank you, Tonya. And then finally, and this will have to be fairly brief because we need to move on to the Q&A, but the task force called on partners from across London to explore how the ideas in this report can be tested and modelled within the city or any London borough. We also know that time is of the essence. Briefly, what do you think this needs? What do you think needs to happen as a priority to make these ideas a reality? Justine, we'll start with you as we did at the beginning.
Hi there.
Hi.
Yeah, I think, we've got to keep the conversation going, haven't we? I mean, I'm always in favour whenever we do a report of saying, what does success look like, and trying to kind of move from the brilliant ideas, the policies, the workshops into a kind of real life scenario. And for me, success looks like people flooding back into town, people getting back into venues, I think there's, at the heart of this, we've got to distinguish between, the experience of sitting on your kind of computer on your kitchen table and, getting back into the city with the energy, the dynamism, the drive, all of that. It's kind of waking the city up. And at the moment, there's nothing to distinguish that experience, is there? Everyone is just having the same experience, which is staying at a computer, and what we've got to do is, bring all that energy back. So the distance between the computer and your kitchen table and what you're missing by coming back into the city and getting engaged in culture, creativity, commerce is really obvious, and you want to get back into that energy.
Thank you, Justine. And then we'll just end with Gideon from a more business perspective. What do you think we need to prioritise?
I think we need to sort of combine our efforts and, as I said previously, just make it a really exciting place for people to want to get to. I think we've all realised that actually we can work pretty well from home, but there is more to life than staring at a computer screen. And I think we just need to sort of jazz it up and rev it up and get that message across. And I think we all need to play our part. So even within our organisations, just making our colleagues aware of what's out there, create networks that we can sort of sell these ideas, so that people are really keen to participate. And I think eventually it will become a self-perpetuating upside, that people will see how great it is. And as a result, it would encourage more of us to do even more. And so hopefully we create that virtuous circle, which I think is so important to get this initiative up and running.
Thank you, Gideon. Okay, so now we have audience questions. And I'm going to start with one from Gareth Lewis, who's from Pop-Up Painting. So what Gareth wants to know is, how can we make sure support and projects in the report reach those most in need in the creative industries, especially given how many of these people have been among the excluded who have missed out on government support in COVID crisis? So who would like to start with that one? Maybe Tonya? Yeah, I was going to choose you anyway.
Well, thinking you're like, you know, I think from an Arts Council perspective, one of the things that we've tried to do is to understand, you know, we are a major funder. And so we try to understand the entire funding landscape and understand all the different needs. Now, there's not kind of an infinite amounts of money that we have to be able to provide. But what we do try is to identify the needs and try to target our funding program such to meet needs where we can. And so one of the things we've done, like for instance, is we've rolled out and invested even further in this thing called Developing Your Creative Practice, which gives artists of all different types kind of support and funding to develop their creative practices in ways they want to go. So we want to kind of foster that innovation through a fund like Developing Your Creative Practice. We also have project grants, which we, you know, have opened up to a broad range of actors, individuals, small organizations and large organizations, to be able to hear from people and be able to support projects that are really pushing things forward in terms of innovation. And so, yeah, so I think our approach really is to kind of think about, and as we think about our new delivery plan that we'll be rolling out this year post-COVID, we'll really be thinking about how to make the money we give out work much harder to make sure that all parts of the sector are supported to the extent that we can.
Brilliant, thank you. The next question is by Elizabeth Mishler. I hope I pronounced that right. And what she's asking is, how do we time initiatives to attract people back to the city? Do we press on as soon as possible, or rather than having false starts, do we wait for better conditions? And if so, how do we define when to initiate the recovery? This feels like it might be a nice one for Roz.
It's a really good question, and I think it's the one that everyone is seeking the answer to. But you know, we've tried the kind of stop-start approach, and it has come, as you say in your question, with negative consequences. In a roundabout way, I'd like to answer the question, and I hope this doesn't sound too alarming, but we commissioned ARUP to assess what the impact might be of kind of stop-start lockdowns. And that was really the worst case scenario that we were asking them to look at. And unfortunately, we're now in that worst case scenario. And the result of that predicted that there would be like a catastrophic 97% decrease in the economic output and a total loss of 18.5 billion in GVA between 2020 and 2024. So it really does demonstrate the need for serious consideration to be given to investing in the sector first and foremost. And what I would say is I support perhaps what you're suggesting is that we need to invest now, but we also need to open at the right time. And what we found when we were doing the kind of lockdown open up was that we actually needed the entire economy to open because they're so interdependent. And what we'd like to see is that we hold off and wait for the right time when the entire business community can open simultaneously.
Thank you. The question here I'd like to ask, sorry, there's so many good questions, it's hard to decide which one to choose. Okay, so we have like Sarah G from Spitterfields Music. And what she wants to know is, how can we ensure that arts, cultural and commercial sectors play a key role in well-being for those living, working and visiting London? Vicky, is that something that you'd like to answer?
Well, ensure is an interesting word, isn't it? Because every event that I've ever taken part in starts with the question, how do we know this is going to be good? And how do we know that this is going to work? How do we know that it's going to attract people? And of course, you can't remove that element of risk from any creative act. It's dangerous out there. It's creating new product after new product after new product. You know, you wouldn't do it in a business. You'd use the old ones that worked. But the fact of the matter is that this spark of ingenuity and creativity is the thing that people are looking for. We know that. As I said, there's an enormous propensity out there to want to do it. So you can't ensure it, but the fact of the matter is we have the evidence to know that it does work. We have quite enough data, and we also have the evidence of how god awful it is that it isn't happening at the moment. So I think we can be pretty much guaranteed that these things are going to happen. But you have to, I think, at the moment, taking that other question into line as well, you have to not think about the deadline, you have to think about the creative process. And now is the time to start thinking about what you would do if you could, and don't put a time limit on it. The other thing I would also say is I think we're going to be living with this thing for a while in whatever form we're living with it. So the digital element to this is vital. You can broaden participation. You can sell London to the world through a digital element. So one of the biggest ways to ensure that people will participate is to make sure that it has some element that allows everybody to participate, not just those people that are standing close to it at any one moment in time.
And I think this might have to be the last question, and it might be a nice one for Gideon. And the question's from Jeffrey Bond, and he's asking, how do we attract more business people into the cultural sector post-COVID when their time is so taken with work?
It's a good question, and it's a question we should really be asking ourselves pre-COVID. I think it's been dialed up sort of in the current environment for very obvious reasons. And all our resources are scanned, both from a people perspective and a cash perspective. I think we have to ask ourselves, and it picks up a little bit on the previous answer, as to what's important for our people. And actually, an element of that is their well-being. And I do think that encouraging people to participate in the arts, certainly I know that sort of anyone from my organisation that assists in culture, in art, brings their skill sets to that particular activity. On a personal level, they benefit from it hugely. And actually, from an organisational perspective, we also benefit, because I do think that the mutual exchange of ideas and thoughts allows them to come back and bring ideas back to our organisation, which we benefit from. So I think that it's important that we sort of all establish that this is something which is relevant for our businesses. We don't necessarily have a duty, but I do think that the symbiotic relationship that the city, culture and the arts have had for many, many years, if we lose that, we do so at our peril. The city will be a much poorer place for it. So I do think it falls into the business critical category of decisions that we all have to make.
Thank you, Gideon. Okay, so I firstly want to thank the panel. Personally, I found this conversation very thought-provoking. I'd also like to encourage people to partner with the task force and take a leadership role in delivering these recommendations. And so we would love it if you could express your interest by the 17th of February to Culture and Commerce at cityoflondon.gov.co.uk. And right now, I'd like to hand back to the Mayor to close.
Thank you, Charlene. Very, very good. And thank you, the panel. Fascinating. And now we have to move forward. And thank you everyone who supported the Culture and Commerce Taskforce throughout this process. Gideon, that last question reminds me that even Jamie Darmond is out there saying there's not much creativity working from home. And I think that's absolutely right across the board, whether it's in business and in the cultural side. We need this wonderful creativity that London has. And really today's report is a call to action for all of us. I get into trouble saying London is the greatest city in the world and there are other great cities, but London is the greatest cities in the world. And we have to do all we can to support London's recovery by supporting the cultural and creative sectors. And London cannot recover unless its culture recovers. And we have a blueprint for how to do it, creative activation, creative exchange, and creative enterprise hubs. And we are keen to work with as many partners as possible. So if there's any way in which you can get involved, help us, or even suggest new ideas, please do email us. As I said, this is a call to action. We're in this together. We're planning at some point when the people come back and footfall come back to do a sort of reopening campaign of the City of London. And that's going to involve the Culture Mile and all the cultural events, and even involve many of our churches, where I'm hoping they'll ring the church bells. And there's just so much we can do. We have so much talent in the city as well. And working together, we can all fuel London's creative renewal. So on that positive high note, a big thank you to all of you for joining this morning.